Gary Johnson was the Republican governor of New Mexico from 1995 to 2003 and is now running for president of the United States as a libertarian. We have a lot to get to in a short amount of time. Governor, nice to see you.
Dave, great to be with you. And I'm seeking the Libertarian nomination. And the Libertarian nominee will be on the ballot in all 50 states. So really, the Libertarian nominee is the legitimate third party.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And we just talked a lot of this out in the green room. And we're in a time situation here.
Go for it.
That's why we're on Larry King set. And there's a lot I want to talk to you about. Because as I told you a few minutes ago, I've had a lot of my audience saying, Dave's going to come out as a libertarian one of these days. You know, I've sort of evolved out of this progressive thing, and they want me to say it. So I'm going to let you sell it. So sell me on libertarianism. Give me Libertarianism 101.
Well, libertarian, this is what I say with a broad brushstroke. Libertarians are fiscally responsible and socially liberal. If you look up the definition of a classic liberal, if you Wikipedia classic liberal, I'm a classic liberal.
Right.
And I think most people fall in that category. Right now, there's a website, isidewith.com. In 2012, that was also online, isidewith. And most of the people that took that test aligned with me. And so most people in this country are actually classical liberals. I think they are libertarian, they just don't know it.
So what's actually the difference between classical liberal, because that's really where I would say I'm at right this very moment. I mean, when I was 12, I remember wanting Michael Dukakis to win. I've always thought I was a liberal. And then I sort of went down the progressive route. But now I see sort of less government as a sensible alternative. So what's the difference between classical liberal and libertarian?
I don't know is there's a difference. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think they are, speaking with a broad brushstroke, one and the same.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and classical liberal is actually considered a conservative principle, right? Which seems
yes.
Seems
I mean, that's
people.
how it all started. Right. That's how it all started out. But the conservatives have lost their way, in my opinion, with a social conservative agenda that I think turns a lot of people off, and rightfully so. It doesn't allow people to make their own personal choices, recognize their own personal liberties and freedoms, and of course the responsibility that goes along with that.
Right. So on two of the things that are the easy ones, like gay marriage and recreational or even medicinal marijuana, shouldn't these be easy thing for you? This is an easy thing, right? Because you want limited government, so it doesn't matter.
Yes, and a woman's right to choose. I mean, throw that in there. Just basic decisions. You as an individual should be the only one. I mean, these are difficult. I don't want to say that marriage equality is a difficult personal choice, but, you know, take abortion, for example. I mean, that's a difficult issue, but who but the woman involved should be making that choice? Right.
So what happened then to the Republican Party that should be for small government and should really be for states' rights? The things that I think you're saying you're for, what happened to them that they got mucked up in these issues that really they should be against?
I don't know, but they certainly have gotten mucked up, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And with regard to Republicans, look, they've always hung their hat on being fiscally conservative. Well, where did that go? I mean, they want to cut spending in social areas, but they want to increase spending when it comes to the military. They are growing government just like Democrats.
So is that the dangerous thing more than anything else? That the one guy who was talking about making government smaller in this entire election cycle was Rand Paul. He didn't even get out of the Iowa caucus.
I agree, and I think that Rand Paul, really, if he wasn't a social conservative, I think there would have been a lot more appeal. I happen to agree with half of everything that Rand Paul has to say.
Right.
But when it comes to those social issues, that's where we part ways.
Right. So he just won't absolute say that he's for gay marriage or for.
He'll say let the states decide that, but personally he would say that no, he's opposed to these issues. Well, personally, I'm not opposed to allowing a person to make these choices, believing in my heart of hearts that these are decisions that only the person involved should be making.
Right. So then does that right there go to how dysfunctional our system is, which probably explains why Bernie and Trump are working, because those are the
So the system right now is the Republican nominee has to cater to 30% of the far right. That's what the Republican nominee is appealing to, 30% far right. The Democrat nominee is appealing to 30% of the far left. when you have 45% of the electorate declaring themselves as independent, what you end up with the two major candidates is a solid 30% representation of the electorate, which is really nuts.
Okay, I'm with you. So your sell job is working so far. I'm fully with you. So what do we do to explain to people? I think people think, when you say to someone you're a libertarian, I think they think you want to dismantle the government. You want people to run around only defending themselves, and roads are going to crumble because the government won't be able to sustain them. They're crumbling anyway, even though the government's involved with them. So what do you do to remove some of the stigma from libertarianism?
Well, I got to serve as governor of New Mexico for 8 years, and guess what? I think things worked a lot better, and in a state that was 2-to-1 Democrat, and having gotten reelected the second time by a bigger margin than the first time.
Yeah. Now you were a Republican though, but you were using a lot of libertarian principles.
Yes, I mean, I was always the finger was always pointing at me, saying, "Well, really, he's a libertarian," which I always thought was a real compliment, and I still do to this day, because it's a lot more clear. You know where a libertarian stands when it comes to all the issues. I remember growing up getting this book on here's where, a very short book on here's where, this is what a libertarian is. And I remember saying, I'm a libertarian. And this was, I want to say I was 14 or 15 years old. Wow, I'm a libertarian.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when I was contemplating running for governor of New Mexico, I showed up at a state libertarian meeting, and it took me about 45 seconds to come to grips with the fact that I would never hold office if I ran as a libertarian.
So what was that about?
Well, just the fact that really disorganized. There aren't many libertarians, but that isn't to say that libertarians aren't principally correct. And libertarianism is really all principle. And yes, less government is better. The biggest issue facing our country right now, I think, is the fact that we continue to spend more money than what we take in. And the ramifications of this at some point is going to be a monetary collapse, and that's going to be ugly. Really, really, really ugly.
Yeah, so I know a ton of my supporters, or a ton of my fans are Bernie supporters. And I like Bernie. I think he's talking about the right things. But you know, this idea that college is free and the rest of this stuff, you would argue that these things simply aren't free and the government probably shouldn't have anything to do with them. Right?
So half of what Bernie says. Wow, right on, spot on.
Right. So that you're talking about campaign finance and things like that.
Well, campaign finance and back to individuals making choices in their own lives, and that there is a corporate America. The crony capitalism is alive and well. I recognize that. Spot on. But then when he starts talking about spending and what government should provide, and a huge, gigantic expansion of government, it's just not possible, Dave. I mean, I'm in the camp that believes that there will be a monetary collapse, and it will be because of inflation, and it'll be a bond market collapse because nobody will be holding on to bonds because inflation will be rising at such a rate that bonds won't be anything that you'll want to hold on to.
Because basically the government is just going to spend and spend and spend and spend,
well,
and it's backed by...
It's backed by nothing, and people then recognize it. And like I say, if you get into hyperinflation, which in my opinion, at some point, will be the conclusion to all of this, you're not going to hold on to a bond when it may be devaluing at the rate of many percentage points a day. You're just not going to hold on to it.
Yeah, so
that's a bond market collapse.
Right. So is part of the problem then that what you just explained to me, that's sort of lofty stuff to be talking about.
It is.
Right?
It is. But it is out there also. And how do you make that as simple as possible? A monetary collapse is when the dollars that you have don't buy a thing. So let's try and just define it in reality. You're not going to be able to buy anything at the grocery store because there'll be nothing on the shelves. People will have recognized that you've got to take all the money that you have and buy everything that you possibly can because it's not going to be worth anything tomorrow. Right. That's a monetary collapse that is something that's repeated itself in countries time and time over the history of mankind.
Right. So this is
we're not immune from that.
So that's sort of like what happened in Greece like a year ago, and then everyone rushes to the banks, then the banks don't let people take
happened
money.
in Russia, happened in Zimbabwe. like I say, this at some point, in my opinion, is going to be the outcome of all this.
So is part of the problem messaging then? Because on one hand, I see Bernie going, here's free college. That's great. Young people go, that free college sounds great. And then you have Trump go, just throwing out this red meat about Muslims or immigration or whatever it is. Like they're just giving easy answers. What you just talked about making government smaller and bonds and our monetary system, that's, we need a better bumper sticker for that kind of stuff, right?
Right, and it doesn't quite fit into a soundbite. It doesn't quite fit into a soundbite, but liberty, freedom, personal responsibility, being
John Stuart Mill, right?
Well, being fiscally conservative, the way that we live our own lives.
I wish I could spend the way the government does. Wouldn't that be sweet?
Well, you would know that
for a little while, right? For a couple of years,
if you never had to pay it back.
Yeah,
if you could get away with that kind of a Ponzi scheme, but you're not going to get away with it. Nor is the government.
So what is the? We're trying to pack in a lot here in a little amount of time.
Yes,
so
thank you.
Jumping. Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah. So what is the libertarian view on foreign policy? Because one of the interesting things that I was seeing in the GOP debates is that these guys are all very to the right. Like we don't talk about nation building anymore, but there's still a lot of talk about war and bombing. And Rand was the one guy that was saying, maybe we need to do something a little more nuanced here. He's no longer part of this thing. So what would be the true libertarian view on foreign policy?
Well, first of all, anyone that's going to do us harm, whether that's individuals, groups, corporations, foreign governments, that's a government responsibility to protect us against those that would do us harm. There is a real Islamic terrorist threat out there. Is it best addressed with military intervention? No, military interventions, I'm going to say, are making things worse. So do we address it with boots on the ground, more bombs, more drone strikes? No. What we need to do is cut off the funding, in my opinion, to the politics of Islamic extremism, which is Sharia law.
Yeah, so you're making the distinction, and this is one of the things we talk about all the time, between the religious aspect and the political side.
We are to the death. We're going to fight for religious freedom and allow religious freedom, but we need to recognize that the politics of Islamic extremism is Sharia law, and it is absolutely incompatible with the U.S. Constitution, starting with women's rights.
Yeah, so what do you make of some of our alliances then? Saudi Arabia is a great example of this, a country that basically is governed by Sharia law, that women still can't drive, they can sort of vote now. I mean, there's a litany of things. They're doing quite the beheading thing too. It's not just ISIS, and yet they're one of our biggest allies.
So it starts with awareness. We need to bring about this awareness within the United States that has not really been clearly defined. And I think this does offer this clear distinction between the politics of Islamic extremism, Sharia law, and freedom of religion, Islam. But it starts with awareness, and we're not there.
Yeah. What do you make of how generally, I feel like our education system has failed to the point where people don't understand basically how government's supposed to work? Like when I listen to Trump and I listen to Bernie, they're saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, or any of the candidates, I'm going to do this. But what they don't realize is the executive branch, the president is just supposed to sign things into law. The legislative branch, Congress and the Senate, are supposed to make the laws, and the judicial branch is supposed to make sure they're legal. And I feel like nobody really understands that. We think we're voting for a president like, oh, here's the king.
Here's the dictator.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, too.
Right. So in everything I say, look, I want you to understand what my positions are on this issue. But the reality is that Congress does have to pass these initiatives, and don't discount the power of the veto. Speaking specifically about myself, as governor of New Mexico, I may have vetoed more legislation than the other 49 governors in the country combined.
Really?
I said no to this legislation, which in my opinion was just going to add time and money to our lives and wasn't going to affect our lives in any way. That there would be a political, an attempt to politically address issues that really weren't addressing the issues at all.
Yeah.
But you do draw a really, really important distinction. Look, we're not electing a dictator. We're electing a president who can sign or veto, but we need to know where that president is at philosophically. And then, not to be discounted is that the president of the United States, governor of a state, administratively runs government.
Right.
So there is a bias, if you will, toward fiscal austerity if you have a president who's going to be fiscally austere. As governor of New Mexico, they wouldn't cut government as much as I wanted. So basically, we took the money and we spent less money than was appropriated and put the money in the bank.
Right.
Of course, my predecessor then ended up spending it all, but there was money in the bank. The coffers were full when I left, but that was a promise that I made.
So a lot of that has to do with our election system and how screwed up that is, because in a certain way, as a governor, it doesn't even behoove you to not spend all the money because you want people to see that there's a lot of things done, whether they can be paid for or not. So you were putting money away, which is great.
I put the money away,
Yeah.
and I think people more than recognize that. And I got reelected. And by the way, here's another a silver bullet to the system.
Yeah.
Is term limits. And I'm the best example I can think of term limits. I really enjoyed the job, but I knew that maximum I had 8 years, so I kind of pushed the envelope as much as I possibly could for 4 years, and then it was Katie bar the door the last 4 years because I wasn't going to get reelected. There was no, I didn't even have that opportunity.
Yeah.
So if term limits were enacted, I think that politicians would do the right thing as opposed to whatever it takes to get reelected, because that's really what it's all about. It's a system that people get into it. They've never been involved in it before. It's very alluring, and they want to stay in it at any cost whatsoever. So they sell their souls to stay in it.
Yeah, not only do they sell their souls, they sell everything around them, right? Everything is
crony capitalism is alive and well. There's a price for favoritism, and big corporations pay for that, and it's for sale.
Can you give me an example of that? Because I know we talk about this a lot.
So in the case of New Mexico, I remember there was a bill that came before me for signatures called the Telecommunications Equality Act.
Sounds good.
Telecommunication Competitive Act.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't competitive at all. Quest Communications, it gave them more of an upper hand than they already had, and I vetoed the bill. Mm-hmm. But it was labeled telecommunications competitive legislation, when in fact it wasn't at all.
Right. Now, were they giving you money at the same time?
They weren't giving me anything, but they had obviously greased this through the legislature in New Mexico. Sure, they greased it.
Yeah. So is there any hope for, I think you're going to say yes because you're running, but is there really any hope for people with integrity to be in this system?
So back to term limits.
Yeah.
I think that people get involved in this for all the right reasons. Initially, I think that they get involved for the right reasons, doing the right thing. Well, if you had term limits, would you actually sign off on this telecommunications bill that I was talking about if you knew that it really wasn't the right thing? I think you'd probably say, well, no, I think we'll pass on that because it's really not fair.
Yeah. So I know I got to let you go. You did some work here. I think you pushed me a little bit further. Do you have a closing argument?
Well, closing argument is there's a website isidewith.com. It was up last cycle. And it's
still up. I did about half of it. I need to do the other half to figure it out. But I did another one, and I came out as legendary.
And as of right now, I do not believe I'm on the site because I've recently announced, but I think that within a very short amount of time, I will be on the site. And I think that everyone should get on that site, answer 36 questions and where you're at on the issues of the day. And I happen to think that if you would do that, I'm making this pitch, if you would do that, I think you're going to find that you end up being paired up with a guy named Gary Johnson.
Yeah, and then see what happens.
Well, and it's one thing to philosophically be in line with what most people think. It's another thing to actually be qualified to be president of the United States and that you might actually do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to also make that pitch.
Yeah. All right. So final thought, and then I'm going to let you go, is so you ran as a Republican Republican 4 years ago.
I did.
And you were in some of the debates. And, you know, I always find them so ridiculous because they're not really debates, right? They're just pointed questions or whatever.
Yeah.
What do we do to make these debates better? Because we got more of them. I've been tweeting all of them. I find them infuriating. What do we do to make debate?
Right now, I am suing the Presidential Debate Commission. People wonder why there's not another choice. Well, at the heart of this is a Presidential Debate Commission. The contention on our part is if you are on the ballot in enough states to mathematically be elected president, shouldn't you be in the presidential debates? I think that could be an absolute game changer. And we're suing the Presidential Debate Commission on the grounds of antitrust, the Sherman Act, that politics is a business, not much of a stretch, and that they collude with one another to exclude everybody else. That's the reality.
And we know it doesn't take very much to know that because we know that the parties, the DNC and the RNC, are working directly with the networks to figure out who they want to put
Well,
on.
and we actually think that the networks actually sign documents also to collude in this conspiracy, if you want to call it that.
Wow, interesting. All right,
Interesting. It's interesting.
I hope next time you'll come back and we can do a full hour and we'll do it on my set. And I'm going to take theiside.com. I'll finish it and then I'll let you know the results.
And wait a couple days or give me a chance to be the name that potentially might pop up.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I want to thank Governor Gary Johnson for joining me today. And you can find out more about his campaign and probably donate. There's probably a donate button on there, right?
There probably
is a donate button.
We're raising hundreds of dollars, by the way.
Hundreds?
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
GaryJohnson2016.com. All right. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.